One of the questions I've often thought is like, who would Jesus call a Christian? And when you read the Bible, what you realize is nobody. Because the word Christian wasn't even used till later. In fact, before Christians were called Christians, they were first called Nazarenes because Jesus was from Nazareth. And so the early followers of Jesus were Jewish, and they were seen as a sect of just Judaism, and they were the Nazarene part of the team. But eventually it became clear that actually they believed something that was different, and they lived in a way that was different. So they picked up a new nickname. They were called the people of the way, followers of the way. They had a way of living, a way of loving that was very distinct. And it stood out so much, they actually got branded. And some of the branding wasn't positive. So in the Roman world, some of the people of the way were branded as, first of all, antisocial, because they didn't go to the Roman civic festivals and parties. They're like, we invite you to the party, you didn't come, you're not celebrating in our way that we celebrate with drunkenness and all kinds of sexuality, and so we think you're antisocial. Secondly, atheists. And this is kind of interesting. The first Christians were called atheists because they didn't worship the pantheon of the gods. And so in a Roman mind, they just couldn't understand, like, why couldn't you just add Jesus to the pantheon of the gods? And like, no, there's just only one God. That's why we can only do that. The third is unpatriotic. So they just didn't worship the emperor, and they weren't as excited about the Pax Romana. And so because of that, they were seen as being less patriotic. 4, they're seen as cannibals. Seriously. Because word spread, oh, they're eating the body and blood of somebody named Jesus. And they're like, no, it's a powerful symbol that we're observing, but that got miscommunicated. They were also seen as weird, which I don't know if that one is stuck. Because they called each other brother and sister, and they weren't related. And people were like, but you're not related, so that's weird. In 6, they were actually branded as bad luck. When something bad would happen, people often thought that the gods were angry and needed to be appeased. And a lot of it was then pointed at the Christians because they didn't worship the pantheon of the gods, so they're bringing us all bad luck. Over time, they started to be made fun of, and instead of being called people of the way, they started to be called little Christs. Oh, look at those little Christs going around doing those little Christ things. And it was meant to be a put down, but the first followers of Jesus started to see it actually as a compliment. They're like, we're trying to do that. That's exactly what we want to do, is live like Christ, to follow him. And so they like that terminology. And the words little Christ mean Christian. And did you know that they were first called Christians in Antioch? And I think that's important, and here's why. The early church had 2 headquarters. There was the headquarters that was in Jerusalem, and that was kind of like the command and control center. And that's where they wanted to make sure that the doctrine remained pure and the leadership order was all kind of put together. And the second headquarters was Antioch. And Antioch became the headquarters from which they began to send out missionaries to the Roman Empire. You'll notice that the Jerusalem church struggled because it tended to be arrows in. The Antioch church tended to grow because it was arrows out. Their focus was spreading the gospel to everybody else, beyond just the Jewish people, but also to the Greeks and the Romans and the Gentiles and even the barbarians. It's just like everyone everywhere needs to hear the gospel because that's what Jesus told us to do. You'll find in churches you can either have growth or control, but you can't have both. At New Life, we want to be an arrows out church, and that takes people who live arrows out, who say it's not about me, and it's not about me having a club with my 3 or 4 friends. It's about us having a mission together. And we believe this, that the deepest friendships that you'll ever have will be the bonds that were forged on a shared mission together. And that's what Christians do. Jesus called Christians disciples. And so you might hear the term like followers of Jesus or disciples. That's kind of what that means. A disciple is someone who hears the voice of Jesus and obeys. Jesus said, my sheep hear my voice and they follow me. And you see this early on in Matthew chapter 4. Jesus is walking along the Sea of Galilee and he sees 2 sets of brothers. And he actually calls them to be his followers or his disciples. And he says to them, follow me and I will make you fishers of men. And I think there's 3 things there that we see about disciples that Jesus is teaching us. The first is this. Jesus says, follow me, not follow this. So this is not a religion. This is a relationship. God is calling you into a relationship through Jesus Christ where you open up your life and begin to do life together with Jesus through prayer and through being a part of the mission of the church. The second is that Jesus said, I will make you. That means that Jesus is the one that transforms us, and he transforms us from the inside out. God always starts heart first. Religion will give you a list of things to change on the outside, but what the gospel does is this is change you from the inside. Jesus transforms people from the inside out. We don't make ourselves. Jesus makes us into who we were always made to be. And it's interesting, he actually thinks that here's like the high calling for all of his disciples to become fisher of men. And here's what that means. It means that Jesus thinks all of his disciples are going to make more disciples. And he's actually talking to fishermen. So that's why he says fishers of men. If you're not fishing, he would probably come up with something else. But what he was trying to say is this, is that Jesus thinks everyone on his team is going to be in the game and not on the sidelines. That a Jesus movement isn't a bunch of observers, but a bunch of participants. And so Jesus is calling you as a disciple to be in the game and a part of making more disciples and sharing your story about how God has brought good news into your life. And that is being on the mission with Jesus. In the next section, we're going to talk about the mission of Jesus.